Welcome to the Apostolic Forum. I'm Dana Thompson, and we're going to continue our topic for today, health care. And here to discuss this topic are two of my great friends, Dr. Thomas Levis. How are you, Dr. Thomas Levis?
I'm doing great.
And also we have Pastor Kenneth Jones.
I'm doing great as well.
You doing well?
Doing well.
It's good to see both of you gentlemen.
Yes.
We're just going to jump right back in to our topic of health care. I know that, in order for some who are watching today to get a more firm foundation, they probably need to make sure they watch part one. But in part two, we finished with a question, or we're beginning a question, should I say, Kenneth, that you had asked. So let's pick right back up from that point.
Yes. First of all, I do represent the common man here in America that just is sitting on the couch, who has questions, who's probably outside of the loop of all the jargon, outside of the loop of various terminologies and issues, but is really trying to get into the know.
Right.
And so this question actually is birthed from that position. But one of the things that concerned me recently is I was watching the Cash for Clunkers deal here in America, is that I heard a lot of car dealers were beginning to pull out of that scenario. Because a lot of them said that the government was not delivering their money on time, was not delivering what they said they would do on time. As an American citizen, that raised a flag for me in terms of health care as well, because I began to become concerned, feeling within myself, do we really want the government with its hands that deep in health care if it could not get these people their money and the things that they had said they would deliver in a timely manner? Do we want them making our medical decisions? Do we want them handling medicine and things of that nature? It was a red flag for me. And if you could speak to that, I would appreciate it.
Well, we live here in the Washington region where many of our friends and neighbors are government employees. And so my experience with government employees is that they tend to be very capable, competent people, and that there are many functions that we trust government to do. Military, police services, fire services. We trust the government to provide education to our children. And I think the government is able to do things competently. So it's become a cliche to say the government can't do anything. And you see examples of cases where the government has not been as efficient or in some cases competent as you would hope they would be.
Right.
But I would say that those cases are as common in the private sector as they are in the public sector. So when you sent me the email and asked me that question, and my reply to you was, sort of I gave you a real answer, but then I also gave you a flip answer. And the flip answer was, well, if we couldn't trust the private sector to predict the international collapse of the economy, and they didn't, why would you trust them with health care? Right. So, of course, that's a flip answer because, there are capable and competent people in the private sector as well. But that mistakes can be made, and the Cash for Clunkers, I don't think could really be equated with the provision of health care.
Wow.
Yeah, that was, I think that was the question, or that was the answer that really did it for me, because it brought clarity to fears, and I think fear is really driving and dictating a part of the discussion now, and I think that's why this video that we're creating now is so important, so that people can think and hear very clearly, what's going on. I had another question that I was thinking about, and when we were off camera, Dana and I were talking about it, and that was the obesity issue. We were talking about that. I read one of your blogs where you were discussing obesity, and I know that there are indicators that obesity is caused by zip code, by environment, and by personal responsibility. But do you foresee a time here in America where people who are in a condition of obesity will be charged more for health care than those individuals who are not?
I hope not. I hope that doesn't happen. The reason is that there are many risk factors that we all have for bad health. I mean, first of all, we all know the person who ate well, exercised regularly, and was thin, and looked to be the picture of health who died suddenly of a heart attack.
Right.
Right? We know those cases. We also know the case of the person who's 90 years old, who's been smoking cigarettes since they were 15 years old and lived to be, you know, practically 100 years old. So we all know that those cases are out there. So the fact that you're involved in risk behavior should not be equated with having the condition.
Right.
It does mean that you're at risk of getting a condition, so don't misunderstand. I'm not suggesting that you should smoke or you should drink excessively or that you should not control your weight. But what I'm saying is that there are many risk factors for bad health, and unless we're going to find a way to categorize every single risk factor, and, you know, I mean, it seems to me the risk of death is greater if you're texting while driving your automobile than if being 50 pounds overweight, right? So, you know, if we're going to start taxing risk by having people pay higher premiums, then I think we need to find all of the risks that everyone's engaged in and then find a way to put a price on that.
As a matter of fact, I think that the government will have a less tendency to do that than the private industry. And the reason why I say that, because if you look at the airline industry now, you know, obese people have to pay for 2 seats.
Yeah.
And some and some airlines charge that for people who are overweight, because they feel like the person who was sitting next to them wouldn't have enough space to sit in the second seat. So if private industry is already exercising that type of right, I would see private industry probably quicker to do that than I would see any type of government program.
Well, of course, more than 50% of American adults are overweight or obese. So it's more than half of the population. So if we're going to charge a higher premium for everyone who's overweight, we're talking about the majority of American adults.
Right. Wow. Kenneth, did you have another question?
Yes, yes, I did. This one comes from just some reading that I had done on the internet. And so I want to read it verbatim. I added, I Jonesatized it, so I added a little bit to it, but I want to read it verbatim because I thought that it was so powerful. Again, this man has really sparked my interest in knowing and understanding, has really been an inspiration to me to really get up and begin understanding this debate. But as a school teacher, my family and I enjoy amazing health care coverage. During the debate on the stimulus package, government estimates on unemployment and economic recovery proved to be slightly off base, reading only early indicators. Why should Americans now believe that they will not be forced out of the private coverage they enjoyed, as basic economics would dictate?
Well, frankly, that could happen, right? So one way to answer that question is, I mean, the honest answer is that we don't know. If there were a public option, you know, some fear, and this is, you know, the argument that I think is from my perspective, is the one truly objective and rational argument against the public option, potentially. If you had a public option, it is possible that some providers, some some employers would drop the public coverage and force their employees onto the public plan. That is a possibility. And I think that the proponents of healthcare reform have not acknowledged that issue sufficiently, that could happen. On the other hand, you know, employers could drop healthcare coverage anyway.
Right.
There's no law that requires, you know, employers to do that. Under at least the House bill, under the bill that's currently going through the House of Representatives, if they did that, they would have to pay additional taxes that would compensate for the additional people who would then have to be on the public option. But there's currently no requirement, and many employers, in fact, don't provide health insurance for their employees. As I said earlier, 75% of the uninsured are people that are employed, that have jobs.